Well, the 2018-2019 NFL season doesn't officially kick off in a terms of literally kicking the football off for another 6 months. The season officially opened this week, and crazy things have happened throughout the NFL. Crazy things have happened throughout Philadelphia as your defending Super Bowl champions, the Philadelphia Eagles, try to make their team better. Now, that was something I always was curious about, what it was like to win the Super Bowl and then in the following offseason try to make your team better than Super Bowl champions. Now, we've seen the Eagles time in and time out make moves, make splash free agent signings to try to improve their roster to get to the Super Bowl, to get to hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. But this is the first time any of us have seen an offseason after a Super Bowl. And it's kind of been a whirlwind of emotions because you're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles bringing in guys to bolster their roster, but at the same time, that means guys that were on the Super Bowl championship winning team are no longer going to be Philadelphia Eagles, whether it's via trade, whether it's via release, whether it's via they just go and sign somewhere else. There are going to be a lot of guys not in the midnight green next year that were on the field or on the sideline when the Eagles won their first Super Bowl ever. Thanks so much for tuning in to Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. Got a great show lined up for you today. Like that little preface kind of mentioned, we will start in the NFL as Eagles free agency and their offseason began this week as what was called the legal tampering period, which is basically a 2-day free pass to go and sign and talk to all the players that you want, that you are looking into picking up for the following season without actually signing anybody, occurred this past week, and now the floodgates have opened. The Eagles themselves have made a ton of moves over the last week to bolster and better their roster while at the same time trying to get under a salary cap number that they were $9 million over. So let's start with that salary cap number. And this first segment's really going to be a full-on recap segment. So if you haven't really pieced everything together with what the Eagles have done this offseason so far, this is going to be a good segment for you. If you know what everything happened, this one might be a little bit boring for you, but this kind of has to be done. We'll start with what the Eagles did in-house. And the first thing that they did, which was a big deal that doesn't really get a whole lot of hype because it's not a signing and it's not a trade, is restructure the contract of Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson willing to take an air quotes pay cut, and we'll get into that in a second, cut his salary from $12.5 million to $5 million, and that saved the Eagles $7.5 million. It's good math there, right? Yeah, was never my strong suit, but that basic math I still have a little bit of a comprehension of. So they saved the Eagles $7.5 million by restructuring his deal, going from $12.5 to $5 million. Now, when we say restructuring his deal, here is kind of what happened. And maybe not kind of what happened. Here is what happened. Lane Johnson basically is going to receive $12.5 million this year. But on the salary cap books, he's only going to get $5. He transferred $7.5 million of that $12.5 million that he was set to receive in 2018-2019 into incentive bonuses, signing bonuses, fully guaranteed bonuses even. But he changed his salary to bonus money, which you can hand out bonus money willy-nilly. Yeah, if an owner has the money, everybody can get bonus money. But you can't give out salary numbers higher than the salary cap. So he changes his salary to $5 million. So on the books, and this is all legal. This isn't like this is a shady backdoor, handshake type deal. On the books, Lane Johnson only makes $5 million next year instead of $12.5 million. While Lane Johnson's not taking a pay cut, he is legally taking a pay cut. Now, again, he's going to still pay taxes on his signing bonus and his bonus incentive money. And the league knows about this, and we all know about this, and it's not like something that teams don't do. So while I keep saying that it's, on the books he's making $5, it's not like it's an illegal maneuver by any means. But that saves the Eagles a boatload of money to go and spend this offseason or just to get under the salary cap number. Now let's move on to a couple of other salary cap moves that the Eagles made. And this one kind of stung me. This one hurt me personally because I've always been a fan of the guy that just works hard, the grinder, the effort guy, the guy that may not be the most talented player on the field, but he will give you everything he's got every time he's on the field. And I think a lot of people feel this same sentiment is the loss of Brent Selleck. And the Eagles cut Brent Selleck this past week after 11 seasons in Philadelphia. He was drafted by the Eagles in 2007. And he played 11 seasons with the Eagles. Good numbers in the meat of his career. Not Hall of Fame worthy, but good receiving tight end numbers in the meat of his career. He became a better blocker as the career went on. He became a great blocker by the end of his career. And he became a veteran leader for a guy like Zach Ertz, who is clearly more talented, athletic-wise, and more gifted than Brent Selleck. But Zach Ertz came onto this team. If you remember Zach Ertz in the beginning of his career, he's not the same Zach Ertz we see today. This Zach Ertz that we got in the Super Bowl and that we got in 2017 is a mature tight end, a guy that's willing to go over the middle, a guy that's willing to sacrifice his body for the betterment of the team. Who do you think he learned that from? He learned that from Brent Selleck. Brent Selleck was not only the longest tenured Eagle, he was the longest tenured Philadelphia athlete in all four major sports. Now, it was John Dorenbos, but obviously those things came to an end at the end of the year, at the beginning of the year, I should say. Then it was Brent Selleck, who spent 11 years with the Eagles. Nearly 400 receptions, nearly 5,000 yards. And when I say nearly, I mean he missed by 2 on each of those statistical categories. 398 catches, 4,998 receiving yards, 31 touchdowns. Now, this year he took a little bit of a step back. Like we said, he was more of a mentor role. He was on the field for heavy run block schemes, but he wasn't the receiving tight end. Obviously, that has transitioned to Zach Ertz over the last couple of years. But he still had 13 catches, recorded a touchdown, helped Zach Ertz, also helped Trey Burton, who we'll get to in a little bit, helped Trey Burton become an NFL starting tight end. Trey Burton began the year as the Eagles' third-string tight end. 365 days later, when we get to September, Trey Burton is going to be another NFL team's number 1 tight end option. And like I said, we'll get to him in just a little bit. But Brent Selleck is a guy that you're going to miss less for the stats and more for the, man, I loved Brent Selleck. Brent Selleck was a guy that busted his butt. He gave it all. He blocked. He was a leader. He was a guy in and out of the clubhouse who said the right thing at the right time, in the right spot, every time he was called upon. So you're not going to miss 13 catches for 130 yards. Any tight end that the Eagles pick up, whether it's in free agency, whether it's in the draft, whether Billy Brown steps up and becomes the number 2 tight end option. And the Eagles really like him, it seems. 13 catches and 130 yards is replaceable by any standard. But you're going to miss the Brent Selleck that gave you the helmetless run down the field that hurdled Ed Reed. That was the guy that would do whatever he needed to win a Super Bowl. And that the fruition and the culmination of the 2017-18 season, for me, was for guys like Brent Selleck, who spent 11 years in the National Football League without getting to the Super Bowl. And finally he gets there and they win. That's kind of a great culmination of the season for a guy like Brent Selleck. Whether he plays next year or doesn't play next year, whether he's an Eagle, he still could be an Eagle, by the way. He still could re-sign on a small deal if there's not a lot of fish, that he's trying to hook. If there's not a lot of teams that are willing to give him decent money, he may come back as an Eagle on a smaller deal. So that door hasn't entirely closed. He's just walked out of it. And that brings me to the other tight end, Trey Burton. Trey Burton's a guy who busted on the scene this season. A good athletic tight end, decent hands, good route runner, a guy that could play tight end. He could kind of be that H-back if you needed him to. But he was a guy that he did what you needed him to do. And Trey Burton got a ton of money because of his athleticism, yes. Because of his ability to play multiple positions, yes. But Trey Burton's salary demands skyrocketed. They went straight up because of the Philly special. Now, we know that Trey Burton was a part of the Philly special. And you can make the jokes and you see the memes and the GIFs about how Trey Burton has more Super Bowl touchdown passes than Dak Prescott, than Kirk Cousins, than, whomever you want to throw in comparison. Because he has one and those guys have zero. But Trey Burton's aura, the narrative of Trey Burton has become such that he outpriced himself for Philadelphia. And this is one of those deals where you see a young tight end coming into his own, coming into the peak of his career, go get the money somewhere else. And as Eagles fans, we're not bitter. We don't say, well, the Eagles didn't make an offer. And Trey Burton said that they didn't make an offer, which may be true. And they may have not offered him a deal because they felt like it would have been disrespectful to lowball him the way they would have had to lowball him. But he felt, slighted, and he went and signed with the Chicago Bears. He got 4 years, $32 million. That's $8 million a year for a guy that was a third-string tight end to begin the season this year. The Eagles didn't have that kind of money. The Eagles didn't have that kind of money for their backup tight end. So do you really think they were going to give it to their their third-string tight end? That's the situation the Eagles found themselves in, was that they had so little money that they couldn't give their backup tight end money. How were they going to give their third-string tight end money? So he signs a deal with the Bears. In 2019, the Eagles are going to get a fourth-round compensatory pick for him, which is, I'm cool with that. You're getting a fourth-round pick for an undrafted free agent. Because if you remember, Trey Burton didn't get drafted by the Eagles. He was a UDFA. So I'll take a fourth-round pick for that guy. Now, granted, it's going to be in next year's draft. It's not in this upcoming April's draft. But what's the difference? I'll take the fourth-rounder. Gives you a couple extra picks. The compensatory picks, by the way, the Eagles are going to have a ridiculous amount in the next 2 years. Because we'll get to all the guys that the Eagles are going to lose over the next couple of years and break down their compensatory value, which you've already got a fourth. You're getting a fifth for a guy that we'll mention in a little bit. You're getting some good compensatory value out of guys that you were going to lose. Guys you were not going to be able to sign. So you get a fourth for Trey Burton. That fifth, by the way, like I mentioned, you get for Patrick Robinson from the New Orleans Saints. So Patrick Robinson is a guy that signed a deal at the beginning of the offseason for $775,000 with the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a show-me deal. It was a deal that you're basically betting on yourself. And we talk about that in sports all the time, betting on yourself. By taking a low-term, low-money deal, it's a show-me, prove-it deal. And if anybody on this Philadelphia Eagles roster provided a prove-it deal, it was Patrick Robinson. The guy played well. He played where you needed him to play. Again, there's going to be an aura about Patrick Robinson that fans feel that they should have made more of an effort to bring him back because he had the pick six in the NFC title game. And the pick six in the NFC title game is something that we'll never forget. It turned the entire game around. It turned the entire NFC championship around. Tied the game at 7-7, and the Eagles would go on to score another 31 consecutive points and win the game 38-7. But the money that Patrick Robinson was going to get, you were going to have to look at it in this light. The Eagles had enough money for one guy, and they had two players that were going to get money. It was Patrick Robinson and Nigel Bradham. Which one would you prefer? The corner who made a couple of nice plays, had his biggest play on a big stage and will never forget it, or the linebacker who had 88 tackles last year? The guy that stepped in on a 2-year, $7 million deal back in 2016 and has been a starting caliber linebacker for you ever since. Stepped in when Michael Kendricks went down. Put the green sticker on his helmet and became the Mike linebacker when Jordan Hicks went down. Became a locker room leader and a defensive captain by the time the season was over. And here's the money that both of those players received. Patrick Robinson got 4 years, $20 million from the New Orleans Saints. Nigel Bradham signed a 5-year deal worth $40 million with the Eagles. So Patrick Robinson, of course, you average that out, gets $5 million a year. Nigel Bradham, over 5 years, gets $8 million a year. I'll pay $8 million for a guy that's going to come in and have close to 90 tackles every season. I'm not going to pay $5 million for a cornerback who will likely be pushed down the depth chart now that Sidney Jones will be healthy for the start of the 2018-19 season. Because think about it this way. When you looked at the Eagles' cornerback position to begin 2017, you went, my goodness, they are going to get throttled. We all thought that. Nobody would have jested at you if you said that the Eagles' corners were the most viable spot to get torched week in and week out for the Eagles in 2017. People would have agreed with you. Their D-line was good. Their O-line was good enough to compete. They had a young, budding quarterback, a receiving core that was far superior than it was a year prior, a running back tandem that was better than what it was a year prior, and a linebacking core that was primarily the same. But if you were to say that the cornerbacks were the weak spot, we'd have all agreed with you. Patrick Robinson comes in, nearly cuts himself in training camp, says on air how bad he's been and how he's being torched every single day. They have one cornerback who they drafted in the second round as first-round talent, but is not going to see the field this year likely. And, of course, he did see the field a little bit in Week 17, but... And then they have a guy that they drafted in the 7th round in Jalen Mills. But then the Eagles go and make a trade for Ronald Darby. They trade Jordan Matthews in the 3rd-round pick for Ronald Darby. Then Patrick Robinson steps up and plays better than any of us ever expected. But is he worth $20 million a year to probably be your 4th corner? Because remember, Sidney Jones, if he can come back and play the way that he did at Washington University prior to his injury, is a first-round talent. And you're still going to have Ronald Darby on the outside. Now, there were rumors that Ronald Darby may be traded, but those rumors, I think, have officially been put to rest since Patrick Robinson did not re-sign. So you have Sidney Jones, you have Ronald Darby, you have Jalen Mills, who played well, other than being attacked by the double move. You've got a guy in Rasul Douglas, who the Eagles are clearly fond of. Now, he may move to safety as time moves on, but you've got 4 guys that can play the cornerback position that you're not paying $5 million a year for. So this was a logical move away from Patrick Robinson and allow him to go get his money somewhere else, because you move from a position of strength or position of weakness to a position of strength. Now, if you look at the flip side, the linebacking core, it's still up in the air. Who knows what's going on with it? The Eagles have openly said they're still trying to shop Michael Kendricks. He wanted a trade. He wanted out of Philadelphia prior to the 2017 season. Now, I think with an uptick in snaps and an uptick in, winning a Super Bowl, that generally changes your mindset. That generally puts you in a better frame of mind. But he wanted out. And the Eagles wanted him out. And now they seem to want to be shopping him again. And there's a reason that they are willing to shop him, and that's A, the signing of Nigel Bradham, and B, a trade we'll get into on the other side of the break. We'll also get to, or a signing, I should say, not a trade on his end, a signing that makes him expendable. We'll also get into a trade, get to some more free agent signings, get to a couple more of the cuts that the Eagles have had to make, or at least, maybe not the cuts, but the players that they've allowed to walk away. We'll get to all of that and more, as this is going to be primarily an Eagles-dominated show today because of the frenzy that has been the free agency period. We'll get to all that and more. We'll step aside. We'll come back. We're going to talk more Eagles. We'll talk free agency, cuts, trades, restructuring, re-signing, all that good stuff, as we can't get enough of the Philadelphia Eagles, despite the fact that their season doesn't start for another 6 months. We're going to take a quick break. Thanks for tuning in. This is Trust the Podcast. Before we get it back to the Eagles, I really was asked a question yesterday by one of my good friends. And this came after the first 16 seed in the history of the NCAA tournament defeating a 1 seed after UMBC not only beats, but absolutely annihilates University of Virginia, the number 1 overall seed, by the way. I was asked, is this the greatest upset of all time? And my answer was immediately no, but it was close. My answer was no because there was a little upset, maybe you've heard of it, where a bunch of college hockey players defeated what was effectively a professional Russian team in the 1980 Winter Olympics. But sans that, this might be the greatest upset of all time. You're talking Joe Namath over the Colts. But remember, Joe Namath over the Colts, they were still 2 professional teams. When I look at that 1980 team, that was college kids versus pros. They weren't labeled pros, but they were pros. So, is this the greatest upset of all time? No, but it might be number 2. It may be number 2. Welcome back into Trust the Podcast. I'm your host, Tyler Zulli. Thanks so much for tuning in with us. As always, I hope you have found us on YouTube or on Philly Sports Network and continue to dive into a lot of the great coverage that our guys provide. I'm just one of many, and I'm very humbled to be a part of a budding team that continues to grow and continues to get better as the years go on. But let's get this thing back to the Eagles. We talked about Nigel Bradham. We talked about Lane Johnson. We touched on Brent Selleck as well. Of course, Patrick Robinson and Trey Burton. But the Eagles weren't done after those moves, because another player that the Eagles brought in, and the reason that Michael Kendricks became expendable, and probably the reason that he became expendable is the Nigel Bradham signing plus this signing, was the Eagles bringing former Denver Bronco Corey Nelson on a 1-year, $2.25 million deal. Now, at 25 years old, the 4-year vet, he'll be in his 5th year this season coming up, primarily played special teams with the Eagles, with the Broncos. He signs a $2.25 million deal. That's not chump change. That makes me believe that the Eagles and Jim Schwartz have some kind of plan for Corey Nelson to step up and have a bigger role in Philadelphia than he did in his 4 seasons with the Denver Broncos. He got an offer from the Broncos as well, and it was very similar in monetary value. But what Corey Nelson said was the Eagles offered him what appeared to be more of an opportunity to get on the field, not as a special teamer. He will be a special teamer, but not strictly as a special teams player, but instead as a guy that could check in and be your weak side linebacker and play on third downs, play when Nigel Bradham needs a rest, play when Jordan Hicks needs a rest. If Michael Kendricks is still around, play when Michael Kendricks needs a rest. It's not a foregone conclusion that Michael Kendricks is gone. He is under contract. It's just an assumption that with re-signing Bradham and bringing in Corey Nelson and them speaking of still drafting a linebacker, you assume that Michael Kendricks may be moved. But they bring in a guy like Corey Nelson to shore up the linebacking position. You know, Jordan Hicks is a ticking time bomb when it comes to injuries. He's been hurt nearly every year of his NFL career, and he got hurt at Texas. It's the reason he fell into the 5th round. But this brings in competition, and competition's always healthy for a team that just won a Super Bowl. Now let's get to some of the cuts next, because this one was a big one. This one happened a little bit later than everything else. That's why I kind of pushed everything down. And I'm trying to do this in some kind of a chronological order, but of course, it's up and down out of position because I was trying to do it in such a way where it was, releases, signings, cuts, trades. And the Eagles announced yesterday that they let go defensive lineman Vinny Curry, who, after having a 12-sack campaign in 2014 and getting his money a little more recently than that, has come up with something, I think, along the lines of 13 sacks over the last 3 seasons. Over 15, 16, and 17, he's simply been not as productive. Now, curiosity sets in, and you wonder if he wasn't a scheme fit anymore. Was he a scheme fit in the old Eagles defense, and he doesn't fit in Jim Schwartz's defense anymore? It's plausible. It's a very good possibility. This move, however, I think had more to do with the fact that Vinny Curry was making way too much money to be part of a defensive line unit that was pretty good without him. In fact, was very good without him. So you let Vinny Curry walk in free agency, and you figure the Eagles need to go get a defensive lineman. You cut Vinny Curry, I should say. You also let Bo Allen walk in free agency. He gets a big deal with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So you're down 2 defensive linemen, 1 D tackle, 1 D end. So what do the Eagles do? Prior to cutting Vinny Curry, of course, they go and make a trade with the Seattle Seahawks. They get a guy who is a defensive end by nature, could slide into the defensive tackle position when they go into that NASCAR package. He's a guy that can do it all. And that's Michael Bennett. Now, granted, Michael Bennett has had his off-the-field concerns. But the Eagles seem to be a team that have rectified off-the-field concerns. And Michael Bennett was not charged, or was not, or he was accused and charged of certain things, but he was never found guilty of anything. So, lapse in judgment, they happen. But let's talk about Michael Bennett on the field. Michael Bennett on the field provides you with a defensive presence that Vinny Curry did not. Michael Bennett gives you a guy that can come off the edge and, like I said, could slide to the D-tackle position if you needed him to. He'd be a smaller D-tackle, but it would, again, it's that NASCAR package. Brandon Graham was doing it last year. So now you have a defensive line of Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Chris Long, Michael Bennett, that just get after quarterbacks. They have a ridiculous and innate ability to get after quarterbacks. And what Michael Bennett cost you was peanuts. Absolutely nothing. Marcus Johnson and a 5th-round pick for Michael Bennett and a 7th? The picks don't really matter. You could scratch the picks up for what they are. The Eagles' 7th-round pick, the one that they just got from Seattle, the likelihood of them getting a player that's going to be a difference maker, small. It happens. You see it all the time. One guy every year. But the likelihood of that guy being the Eagles' pick, it's 1 in 32. UDFAs have better success than 7th-round picks. And the 5th-round pick that the Seattle Seahawks are receiving, it's not much better. You've got a better shot at getting a guy that could become a potential superstar. But does that really strike fear into you? Like, my goodness, the Eagles lost their 5th-round pick. Now, I know that the Eagles don't have many picks. Now they don't have a 2nd, they don't have a 3rd, or a 5th. But are you really worried about the 5th-round pick for the defending Super Bowl champions? Because I'm not. But you get Michael Bennett effectively for Marcus Johnson. You going to cry yourself to sleep that the Eagles traded Marcus Johnson? That doesn't bother me at all. I don't think that bothers anybody. It doesn't bother anybody because nobody cares. Marcus Johnson hardly saw the field. He's a good special teamer. He's a decent receiver that may go on to have some success in Seattle. I hope he does. Seems like a good guy. But it doesn't really bother you that Marcus Johnson's no longer an Eagle? No! You're looking at it and saying the Eagles just picked up Michael Bennett. Former Pro Bowler. Super Bowl champion. Part of one of the best defenses of the 21st century. It's a great move for the Eagles. And the whole locker room thing doesn't worry me. The Eagles have a great locker room in place. I don't think Michael Bennett is going to be a problem. I think what happened in Las Vegas is a one-time incident, and it won't happen again. So you get a guy for Marcus Johnson that could give you solid play on the defensive line. Now let's move to the second trade that the Eagles made. This one was a little bit of a larger contributor going. The Eagles traded another wide receiver. And I can't believe that the Eagles were able to get anything for this guy, considering we all knew in Philadelphia that the likelihood was extremely high that they were going to cut him because he was making $5 million next year. and that's Torrey Smith. Torrey Smith had a serviceable season for the Eagles after signing that deal, but he wasn't a world beater. He dropped a couple of easy passes. He was a good burner. He created space for guys like Alshon Jeffrey and Zach Ertz. He was a great locker room guy. Notice the common theme, by the way, and you've seen this. You know how true that this is, but everybody was a great locker room guy. The Eagles had such a brotherly love in the locker room. It's almost creepy how close these guys are. But to lose Torrey Smith doesn't, again, you're not going to lose sleep at night over it. He was a decent player for the Eagles. I think his best years are behind him. They trade him to the Carolina Panthers for a cornerback, which, by the way, made Patrick Robinson expendable, in Darryl Worley. Worley, a young guy, had some success in Carolina. I think could be lined up for a potentially breakout year with the Eagles. Now, I don't know how he fits into the scheme. There are guys that are much smarter than me and have way more in-depth knowledge, like my good friend Jeff Mosher. But I think he's set for a big year because he's not going to have to be the number one guy. Heck, he's not even going to have to be the number two guy. He's going to have to be the Eagles' third corner. Cover a lot of bigger, slower receivers, tight ends that can get out in the open field. Doesn't bother me. But you get something, anything, for a guy that you are going to cut. That is the genius of Howie Roseman. The man is a freaking miracle worker. I had my doubts about Howie Roseman, but more so had my doubts about Chip Kelly. And when Howie Roseman returned, after the debacle that was Chip Kelly's total takeover, that's what you can call it, total takeover, I wanted to give Roseman some time. And what Roseman did in effectively 2 years was make the Eagles Super Bowl champions by signing all of the right players. Now, that may not happen ever again. What Howie Roseman did in a 1-year span was nothing short of perfect, and that may never happen again. But I've got to give him the benefit of the doubt after what he just did last season. And for the sheer simple fact that Howie Roseman was able to get anything for a guy that was supposed to be cut later in the week. I don't think that you can speak that into existence enough that the Eagles were going to cut Torrey Smith, and they were able to get anything for him. Anything is nothing short of amazing. So I don't know if Darryl Worley's going to be this great corner that the Eagles have found, and they ride off into the promised land with 3 cornerbacks that are above average to very good, with he and Sidney Jones and Ronald Darby, and still a good safety tandem. I don't know what Worley's going to bring to the table. But I do know that Howie Roseman got something for nothing. And that amazes me. Absolutely amazes me. This Eagles team, if you look at it on paper, and you assume that Carson Wentz is relatively healthy for most of the season and going towards the postseason, with Nick Foles likely still being a Philadelphia Eagle, will likely be the quarterback for the first 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. Is this team better than they were last year, at least on paper? And I think the answer is yes. Think of the upgrades minus the downgrades and minus the losses. Michael Bennett or Vinny Curry? I'll take Michael Bennett. Oh, by the way, one name that I forgot to mention. 1-year deal. Philadelphia Eagles sign Haloti Ngata, former Baltimore Ravens stud. His best years are behind him, sure. But I think he's still got a little bit left in the tank. He's still one of the most physically imposing interior linemen in the game. So you get a guy like Haloti Ngata to replace Bo Allen. Who would you prefer? I mean, obviously, in the beginning of his career, it's Ngata, and it's not even close. But I still would consider Haloti Ngata to be a better defensive tackle than Bo Allen. So you upgrade on 2 defensive line positions. Patrick Robinson or Darryl Worley? That one still remains to be seen. I'd like to see what kind of product Worley can put out on the field before I make that kind of judgment call. Robinson was good. I don't know if he'll ever have a year like he did this year in the 4 years that he's going to spend in New Orleans with his reunion tour with the Saints. That one still remains to be seen. The Eagles lose LeGarrette Blount. He signs a deal with the Detroit Lions. This will be his 3rd team in 3 years. I would venture a guess to say it won't be his 3rd Super Bowl appearance in 3 years. Remember, he beat the Atlanta Falcons with the New England Patriots 2 years ago. Of course, he wins the Super Bowl with the Eagles last year. But I would venture a guess to say that streak will come to an end at 2. So you take a look at the running back core. There is now no longer LeGarrette Blount in the mix, with him signing with the Lions. Darren Sproles still has yet to be signed. He's still up in the air, whether he will return to the fold or not. So you have Jay Ajayi and Corey Clement left from the producers of the back end of the season. And whether Sproles returns or not, again, still remains to be seen. Donnell Pumphrey still on the roster. He'll come off the IR. And Kenyon Barner still around. Hasn't been re-signed just yet. I don't know if they will re-sign him. He's a great kick and punt return guy. He doesn't do a whole lot for you out of the backfield as a running back. So you have 2 proven running backs on the roster, and Darren Sproles sitting in the wings. Haven't decided if they're going to re-sign him or not yet. Is that enough for you at the running back position? Because remember, the Eagles carried 4 backs to begin the year. It was Sproles, Blount, Clement, and I guess you could consider Wendell Smallwood in there too. Wendell Smallwood's still in the mix as well. But LeGarrette Blount gets $4.5 million to sign with the Detroit Lions for a year. That's double what he was getting in Philly last season. Again, with a team that's strapped for cash, that's not the money you want to spend on a guy that's going to get you 10 carries a game. And the Detroit Lions were willing to overspend because A, they had the money, and B, they haven't had a running back that was successful, that went over 100 yards in a game in like 5 seasons. You know, figured it was going to be one of the guys that they've tried to pick up would find their way to 100 yards. You almost by accident would find 100 yards in a game over 5 seasons. The Lions haven't had it. So they go get LeGarrette Blount in hopes that he could be the guy. But are you comfortable with the Eagles running back core going into this season with what they have right now? Do you feel like they need to sign Darren Sproles? Do you feel like they need to draft another running back? Allowing LeGarrette Blount to walk and not re-signing Darren Sproles as of yet makes me believe that the Eagles are going to try to draft a running back sometime over the 3-day period of the NFL draft. Now, the issue becomes, again, they don't have a 2nd and a 3rd round pick. So do you trade pick 32, get a couple of picks in the second and third round, and then look to find your running back? Or do you take a running back at 32 if a guy like Darius Geis, if a guy like Ronald Jones, if a guy like Kerryon Johnson were to fall to the 32 spot? I'd consider it. I know you have more pressing needs, but I would consider it because I don't think Jay Ajayi is the long-term solution, and Corey Clement's not really a feature back. He's a great number 2, but I don't think he's quite the feature back option. So I would certainly consider taking a running back sometime in the draft that you would consider to be a starting caliber running back. I know they need linebacker. I know they need offensive line help. I'd make the move. I would pull the trigger and go and find a running back at some point between April 26th and April 29th. Give it a shot and see what happens. You're the defending Super Bowl champions. I think you're allowed to take some shots like that when you need to, especially when you're trying to repeat with all the moves that you're making right now. But let's step aside and take one final break. We'll kind of switch gears a little bit. We'll get into all of the other 3 main Philadelphia sports over the next 20 minutes or so. We'll get into some detail on a pitcher, a starting pitcher that the Philadelphia Phillies are going to be losing for the next 6 to 8 weeks. Flyers taking a little bit of a slide. Sixers get 2 wins in 2 nights over Atlantic Division foes. Keep pace in the Eastern Conference. We'll get to all that and more. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you come back for the final segment. This is Trust the Podcast. Have you ever heard the old saying, no good deed goes unpunished? Because that's what it feels like to be a Philadelphia Phillies fan this last week. The Phillies go out and they make a splash move and they acquire veteran pitcher, former Cy Young Award winner Jake Arrieta to a 3-year deal effectively worth $75 million, which for a guy of his stature is not a terrible deal. It's not an awful deal whatsoever. However, the Phillies get some bad news this week. Find out that righty Jared Eichhoff is going to miss 6 to 8 weeks with a lat injury. So do they even each other out? Is that the reason they went and picked up a guy like Jake Arrieta? What do the Phillies do from here? It's all valid questions. And questions that I hope that I can attempt to answer in the next 15 minutes or so right here on Trust the Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning back in for the final segment today. My name is Tyler Zulli. Thank you for finding us here on Philly Sports Network or on YouTube at Philly Sports Network as well. Whatever avenue you find us at, we're kind of like one of those bands that doesn't care if you pirate their music as long as you listen to their music. We don't care where you find us. You can find us on our stream at our site. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on iTunes. Wherever you find this podcast and all of our great stuff at Philly Sports Network, we find that to be great. So thanks so much for tuning in and coming back and hanging out with us for one final segment here on this episode of Trust the Podcast. I apologize. My voice does sound a little bit shaky today, and I get that. It's kind of, it doesn't sound great today. And I vastly apologize for that. But I will do my best to continue to soldier on and bring you some great Phillies news. Well, some not great Phillies news, but great Phillies conversation. Because for me, this Jared Eichhoff injury is more serious than they are letting on right now. They said 6 to 8 weeks, which means that he's not going to begin throwing for probably 4 to 5 weeks, which means that you probably won't see Jared Eichhoff in the rotation until May. I would guess early May would be the first time that you would see Jared Eichhoff in the rotation for the Phillies. So what does it really mean for the Phillies pitching staff? Well, for me, it means that they knew that this injury was more serious than they were originally letting on, and there's a reason the Phillies went out and signed a guy like Jake Arrieta. Because I think they were content to go into the season with what they had. Because they did not want to spend any more money. But you bring in a guy like Jake Arrieta and then back end the big signing of the former Cy Young Award winner. You back end that with a small sidebar that Jared Eichhoff is going to be out 6 to 8 weeks. And you get a fan base who goes, well, Eichhoff's out, but we got Arrieta. The Phillies got Arrieta. And for me, they're kind of one and the same. They are a tandem move. The Phillies picked up Jake Arrieta, I think, because they wanted to bolster their staff, but also because they knew how serious Jared Eichhoff's injury was. So you don't necessarily look at this signing and go, all this was a chance for the Phillies to get closer into striking distance to a wild card spot. Because that's not simply the case. That's not all that it was. You have to look at this on the surface as well and then dig a little bit deeper and see that Jake Arrieta is a better pitcher than Jared Eichhoff, but it's effectively a replacement for Jared Eichhoff for the first 6 to 8 weeks. I also would like to touch on the Jake Arrieta signing in general before we discuss on where they go from here with the injury to Jared Eichhoff and what the next step is. Because I look around Major League Baseball and I see guys that did not sign until February, until the beginning of March in the case of Jake Arrieta. And I have to believe that there was some form of collusion between the Major League Baseball team owners this offseason. And that collusion was they all got on the phones. They picked up one of their 17 iPhone X's, and they called each other up and said, nobody sign anybody at the beginning of the offseason. Nobody sign any of these top-tier players to the money that they're asking for. We are going to walk down every single top-tier player. We're going to walk down Yu Darvish. We're going to walk down J.D. Martinez. We're going to walk down Jake Arrieta. And what the teams were able to do by not signing these big-name players, they were able to walk down guys like Jake Arrieta from $30 million a year to $25 million a year, which doesn't sound like a huge decrease, but it is a 16% decrease in a salary. And that's what teams were looking for, was to cut out that additional 16% on guys like Arrieta and Darvish and Martinez. Because the price tag on some of these guys was getting to a point where it was too high for even the top-tier teams. Now, I think Eric Hosmer still got a ridiculous amount of money to go play with the San Diego Padres, but I believe San Diego was hell-bent on getting a guy like Hosmer to come play for them and to kickstart their offense. To put together Hosmer and Will Myers as a very formidable 3-4 or 2-3 or 4-5 or 3-5 or whatever kind of combination of the two they wanted to put the two together with. So it wasn't necessarily the fact that San Diego was trying to walk Hosmer down, but the rest of them, I feel like there was some form of walking back down, some form of legal collusion between the owners that basically said, don't sign any of these guys. Don't do it until we can get their asking salary price down a little bit. And when we do that, then start to sign them. And you see that Jake Arrieta didn't get the years he wanted. He didn't get the money he wanted. But the season was rolling around and he didn't have a team. He did not have a team to play for. And the Phillies seemed like a logical landing spot if he wanted his money. And the Nationals seemed like a logical landing spot if he wanted to win the game. And it's clear what kind of player Jake Arrieta is by which team he signed with. Now, obviously, there could have been some backstory that we don't know about where the Nationals didn't offer him at all. But publicly, it seemed as if they were going to offer him a deal that was not going to be as lucrative as what the Phillies were able to offer, simply because they didn't have the money to give it. Because they were paying guys like Bryce Harper and Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg. But if I'm Jake Arrieta, I'm going to take the small pay cut and go try to win a World Series again. But that's why Jake Arrieta and I are different people. That's probably why Jake Arrieta is about to make $25 million a year, and I don't make $25 million a year. But if you look at it from Jake Arrieta's standpoint, the Phillies were offering him the best money deal. And he took it. And now he will likely be the opening day starter, despite the fact that Gabe Kapler did say that Aaron Nola would be the opening day starter. I don't know if that will hold firm or not. I doubt that it will. I would assume that Jake Arrieta is going to pitch on opening day, unless he's not ready to pitch by the time opening day rolls around, which, by the way, is in a week and a half. It's, 11 days from now? I don't know if he's going to be ready. So they may back-end him at the beginning of the season, and you're going to see Jake Arrieta start the home opener as opposed to opening day. Because what does the home opener bring? Ticket sales. And we all know that the last couple of years, Citizens Bank Park has been a barren wasteland because ticket prices are still pretty high and the team was not very good. So if you could get a guy like Jake Arrieta to headline your home opener, I think the Phillies would take that. So you look at this pitching staff now, all in all, without Jared Eichhoff to begin the season. You've got Aaron Nola and Jake Arrieta at the top of your rotation. Now, they may not pitch back-to-back days because, like I said, Jake Arrieta may simply not be ready to go. But you've got these two guys at the top of your rotation that make you a much more formidable five-man rotation than what the team was 3 weeks ago. Because I said it on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, while I don't believe that Jake Arrieta makes them a playoff team, of course you're going to want to get a second premier starter in your rotation. You can't go with Nola and four guys. You could feasibly go with Arrieta and Nola and three guys. It's still not ideal, but it's much more doable than it was 3 weeks ago when it was just Nola and four guys you were going to throw into the rotation. So Eichhoff's set to miss 6 to 8 weeks. We know that to be fact now. The question really becomes, who steps up in Jared Eichhoff's place to take, whether it's to become the number 3 guy or to become the number 5 guy and two other guys slide up? What we do know is that Aaron Nola and Jake Arrieta will be the headliners of the rotation. What we also know is that it seems likely that Vince Velasquez and Nick Pivetta will begin the season as two of your other arms in the rotation. Whether they're number 3 and number 4 or number 4 and number 5, they appear to be locks for the rotation. So it comes down to the final rotation spot. Now, the question becomes, do you go out and sign a guy to become your 3, or do you allow one of the other arms within your rotation, within your camp, to become the number 5? Because I have been quoted as saying Jake Arrieta does not make the Phillies a playoff team. However, the addition of another big-name arm, a la Alex Cobb, then you have Nola, Arrieta, Cobb, you're starting to look more like a playoff rotation. You're never going to get a rotation of Holiday, Hamels, Lee, and Oswalt ever again. At least not for a very long time. Culminations of rotations don't work that way very often. If you think back to rotations of that nature, how many can you come up with off the top of your head? I bet it's not many. 2, 3, maybe 4 if you're an older baseball fan. But those kind of rotations don't come together. But if you add a guy like Alex Cobb to this rotation, and you front end the rotation with Nola, Arrieta, Cobb, back end it with Pivetta and Velasquez, and you add Eichhoff to the rotation when he's ready, and perhaps move Velasquez to the bullpen, now you're looking at a team that could win 85 games, maybe 87 games. Because right now, to me, this is a team that maxes out at 81 wins, even with the addition of Jake Arrieta. So a guy like Alex Cobb to the fold, add him, now you've got a team that's worth talking about in playoff contention. I think with Alex Cobb and Jake Arrieta, the Phillies jump the Mets. I think they jump the Giants. They might even jump the Milwaukee Brewers. So what that would leave is Colorado and the St. Louis Cardinals to try to get above that second wild card spot. So does it make sense to bring in a guy like Alex Cobb? I think so. But let's say they don't. Let's say they remain in-house. Who's the option? Well, it could be Zach Eflin. It could be Ben Lively. It could be Mark Leiter Jr. I've heard rumors that it even could be a guy like Tom Eshelman, who won the club's and the franchise's award for the best minor league pitcher last season, where he split time between Reading and Lehigh Valley. He may be a little bit of a long shot because you have to add him to the 40-man roster, which means you're going to have to DFA somebody else or take somebody else off your 40 and hope that they don't get scooped up. So really you're looking at DFAing somebody because you're not going to take one of your young guys off of your 40-man roster and expose them to free agency, basically. And it's not really free agency, but it's effectively team free agency. So I don't think it'll be Tom Eshelman to start the season. Would I be surprised if it was any of the other guys? Not really. I think you have a group of 3 guys who, despite the fact that they pitch 3 different styles, really come about 3 of the similar outcomes. None of them, I should say, are world-beating pitchers, and none of them really strike fear into your heart as an opposing hitter, but they could get the job done. They're going to be a back-end 5 with a high 3, mid-4 ERA. And I'm okay with that. Would I like to see a guy like Alex Cobb? Yes. Does Alex Cobb make them a playoff team? Maybe. Does Zach Eflin make them a playoff team? No. Does Jared Eichhoff make them a playoff team? No. But they're moving in the right direction. And we'll see what happens with Jared Eichhoff's progression as this 6 to 8 weeks moves down the line. I doubt that he'll be ready in 6 weeks. They'll probably ease him back because he really is going to have to restart his spring program because now he's not throwing for at least 5 weeks. So he's going to have to re-engage in what he was doing throughout the spring, and now he is basically back to February form in the middle of May, which means he could be ready in the middle of May, but he also could need another 4 weeks, which takes him to the early part of June. So now you're without the services of Jared Eichhoff for 12 weeks instead of 8. And that's not something I would like to see the Phillies rotation have to go through and piece together who's going to be that guy. I'd like to see Alex Cobb. I think it's a long shot at this point, but we'll see how things progress as the next couple of weeks go on as they break camp and find out who is going to be on the 25-man opening day roster. That'll do it for me this week. Thanks so much for tuning in each and every week. If it's your first time hearing us, thank you so much for finding us. We hope you come back. If you are a frequent listener, thank you so much for tuning in each and every week. You are the reason that I'm able to do this because without you guys, it would be pointless for me to do this. So thank you so much for continually supporting me and Philly Sports Network throughout the last five months or so that I've been doing this podcast and throughout all of the years that Liam Jenkins has headlined this thing and really brought it into fruition. So thanks so much for tuning into this week's edition of Trust the Podcast. We'll be back this time next week to give you some more great Philly sports breakdown. Until then, have a great week.